Thanks very much. This is really one of my favorite topics. The slides you're going to see here, hypothetically, don't correspond to the black and whites in your course handout, because I mixed and matched it and added some additional ones. But I hope to make this relatively intelligible. This test, which is available from at least one, I think 2 labs here in Australia, is, I think, one of the most useful tests in medicine. Far and away, it turned out to be, from a personal point of view, the most important factor in my own son's recovery. And I'll be talking about him in some detail a little bit later on. Mauve is the color lilac or violet, isn't it? And some of you say mauve, but I say mauve. And this is this mauve factor, which is a toxin measurable in the urine of subjects across a diverse range of behavioral disorders, was discovered by Donald Irvine, who was working with Abram Hoffer back in 1958. And the clinical work that ensued off of this laboratory discovery was pioneered by Abram Hoffer and then later refined by Carl Pfeiffer. They called this stuff in urine, which used a color indicator to show up as a lilac-colored stain, mauve factor, after the lilac-colored appearance. The stuff is labile. It's not very stable outside the body. Breaks down pretty rapidly. And it's, unless the lab and the clinicians and family know what they're doing, it can be a little tricky to work with. Abram Hoffer would be considered the father of mauve. You have some idea about Abram Hoffer? He passed away a few years ago, but he's really one of the main pioneers in nutritional and what we call orthomolecular medicine. And in my conversion to a nutritional perspective about 20 years ago, I made him one of the first stops on my visits. It didn't take me more than a week or so with Abram Hoffer elbow to elbow in his practice in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada, before I became convinced of the validity of much of what he was claiming in terms of response. Very, very serious illnesses, including schizophrenia, to his nutritional treatments. This mauve factor looks like that. The chemical formulation is a ring, a 5-membered ring with the nitrogen there included in the ring. And the shorthand name for this is HPL. And it looks an awful lot like, here side by side, the cryptoperol. You can see a subtle difference in this structure. I've spent many hours trying to figure out why clinical medicine doesn't use this test. And part of it is its nutritional implication. And the clinicians don't usually use much in terms of vitamin or in this case mineral supplementation. But I think in the basic sciences it also had to do with the fact that in its early stages, when there was considerable excitement about this factor being found in the urine of schizophrenics, not once but twice, in 1969, as I recall, and then again in 1970, the mauve factor, HPL, was misidentified in the most prominent of all journals, darn it, Nature, as cryptoperol. And then it was only a few years later that was discredited. And so it turned out that this was not the accurate chemical identity at all. And that really put the whole Mauve community on its rear foot. Anyway, Mauve doesn't respect diagnostic categories. You can have this stuff elevated in the urine no matter what your diagnosis. It's found to be elevated in Down syndrome at 71%, schizophrenia, depending on your study, between 40 and 80%. Did I goof? I have his influence on machines. The autism, something in the high 40% range, as this has been studied. ADHD, 40-some%. In alcoholism, depending who's reported, it can range between 20 and 84%. And the fact of it is that no matter what the diagnosis, the clinical observation is that the problem gets better as you solve the Mauve, as you get this stuff to leave the body. There are semi-scientific reports, not really well organized, on the clinical correlates for patients who have Mauve, and it's worth going over these lists. There's a lot of wisdom in these clinical reports. And as we go over them, you can form an image, of how this might apply to persons within your family. I hardly touched it.
It's not you. Can you use the clicker?
The clicker?
Yeah.
I love clickers. Do I point this clicker at this? Did that click? Pfeiffer correlates. Yeah. Well, the Pfeiffer correlates are nail spots. Those little white flecks that you see sometimes in subjects? The kind that maybe you'll get only after you've had a virus or an illness of some other sort. Those white spots in the nails are pretty significant when you see them. They mean something nutritionally. Stretch marks. Stretch marks tend to go with this elevation as well. And they stem from the same problem as the flecks in the nails. And that, to tell you early, is low zinc, which is one of the two big, well, at least probably the two biggest nutritional holes that this stuff implies. Pale skin, in the classical descriptions of early patients, they'd sometimes described a China doll appearance. Really inability to tan, really bleached out looking skin. This is by no means exhaustive or applicable to all patients. Knee and joint pain, constipation, poor dream recall, I think, is important in most patients with high Mauve. And that would appear, at least according to such experts as Abram Hoffer, to associate with depressed function of vitamin B6, which, along with low zinc, is the other really big problem with this stuff. Morning nausea, the non-desire to have breakfast goes along with this, and these high Mauve patients have that quite commonly. Light and sound intolerance for certain odors or fragrances, migraines, stitch inside has been reported. Now, Bill Walsh, who's made quite a mark here in Australia from the nutritional point of view, and one of the best friends I could ever ask for, also adds to this list. He says that one of the hallmarks of a high Mauve is low stress tolerance. And I'll be talking with you about how this, I think, relates to the high levels of oxidative stress inherent in the metabolic condition described. Anxious, overly pessimistic, explosive anger, fly off of the handle at the smallest thing. Think Mauve. Hyperactivity. Oscar Kruse felt that social withdrawal, emotional lability, loss of appetite, and fatigability were very important in his cohort of high Mauve patients. Another slide which is largely redundant for poor dream recall. Do I need help again? Yet again?
Every time you move the computer, it's not.
Okay. Could we screw the thing in?
No, it doesn't take the screws.
No, it doesn't take it.
No.
Do I press this button here?
Yes,
Okay, would you do it? and I'll be able to get that one to work.
Okay, I'll work it for you.
I'm ready. Oh, so let's go ahead with this slide. Lighter hair, acne. So is this working? Yeah. That's working. I just pressed that button and pointed at you. No, here. Or her. Lighter hair, acne. When I see acne, especially in a young person, I'm thinking low zinc. And the second thing I think about is low zinc, and the third thing I think about is low zinc. Obesity maybe associates as well. Now, I pressed. I pointed. I pressed and pointed.
Try again.
I'm pressing.
Okay. We've got a solution. Just keep pressing the one you've been and I'll try and fix that one.
But when I press this one, it jiggles that thing.
Just don't touch it.
And some catch that catch-22. Thank you for your patience about this. It's almost getting to be fun up here. Kind of sadistic of me, too, isn't it? Coarse eyebrows, knee and joint pain, cold hands or feet, constipation. The eosinophilia, I think that one is really pretty common. That's seen on the white blood cell count. That one went on its own, but it's probably okay. And depression, I think, very, very common manifestation. It runs in families. If mom and dad had it, mom or dad had it, it really makes it more likely that offspring are going to have it. That's very clear cut. It can associate clearly with some major psychiatric symptoms: paranoia, hallucinations, perceptual disorganization, crime and delinquency, substance abuse, sometimes relatively sudden onset of a change in behaviors in adults. I mean, Abe Hoffer published a series of prominent patients who had previously had very high accomplishment and prestige in the community. It's lawyers and judges and doctors whose behavior really changed adversely. And he took it back and determined that it associated with the appearance of mauve in urine and rectified with treatment. When the American lady astronaut had the event where she drove across country a few years ago to accost a rival at Cape Canaveral, I thought perhaps it was mauve. And we had her tested. It wasn't, but it surely could have been, and it's demonstrative. For the two-part review article, which I wrote about mauve a few years ago, and which I can get you copies of if you want to email me, woody.mcginnis@gmail.com. This mauve, or HPL, was shown to correlate very, very well with lower levels of zinc. And the strongest inverse correlation was with red cell levels of zinc, although I'm sure serum zinc is still quite useful clinically. We got the 4 different laboratory heads competing, biochemical laboratories collaborated in the authorship of that article, which in itself was quite a nice effort. The white-celled zinc also associates, if you have low zinc, or if you have high mauve, as you see on the lower axis, you get lower zinc. Or higher mauve, lower zinc. These are inverse correlations demonstrable in white cells. The white flecks in nails is a really good sign for zinc deficiency. Zinc doesn't stick around the body much longer than water-soluble vitamins. If you stop dietary intake of zinc when you're sick, or even for a couple of days, you see blood levels drop pretty significantly. It washes out real fast. And as I'll show you later, zinc loss also associates very much with higher levels of oxidative stress. You see the flecks in the nails, you should be thinking about the possibility of high mauve. Now, this is my son, Ryan McGinnis. And genetically, Ryan is half Negro. And when he came to us as a neonate, we were so pleased to have adopted a baby boy. And we were also intrigued by the fact that he looked like he'd just gotten off the California beach, in that he had darker skin, as predicted by his genetics, but he had almost pure blonde hair. He also had eczema and lots of GI problems, and in short order was eventuated as the most hyperactive child I yet have to see. And he was, he had a lot of autistic traits. That's the deal about autism, ADHD. There's so much overlap. I'm almost bored by the labels. You can almost treat them the same. I mean, it's individualized patient to patient for both disorders, but there's an incredible overlap between these two. Half of the children with official diagnosis of ADHD have autistic traits, and half of the children with official diagnosis of autism are hyperactive. And this is what Ryan looked like. He was our little blonde beach boy, and I had no idea, because I had no knowledge of the effects of nutrition on health, having, just graduated from medical school. And it just didn't make sense. But here he is when he's 2 years old. And then on the left, he's 4. And then he's 6. And he's, if anything, looking worse. He's skinny. His hair is still light as can be. And then I started going to these crazy nutritional conferences, and affiliating with shady characters. 6 years old on the right, we got a urinary Mauve test from one of the only labs in the U.S. that offered it, from Wichita, Kansas, and his was sky high. And this told me to start him on zinc, and a lot of it, and vitamin B6. And here's what he looked like at age 8. And that's his natural and meant to be hair coloration. And let me tell you, his behavior improved as much as his hair color did. And the zinc and the B6 are still our mainstays. Now with Ryan, we found that the activated form of B6, which is called pyridoxal 5-phosphate, P5P, which the body does not have to convert to the active form. It's ready, served, active B6. It worked with him better in the initial years. And then we saw him sort of lose response to that and start to respond better to regular pyridoxine, vitamin B6. And I think it's because, as Walsh says, these slender malabsorbers, and he would fit into that, have such leaky guts when you first start treating them that the P5P, the activated B6, gets a reasonably good absorption against a thinned out abnormal gut. But as his gut improved with all the rest, with all the nutritional remedies we were using, he eventually outgrew that, and so he did better with the B6. You can mix and match those two. One of the key things to remember is that when you're given B6, you always want to make sure about adequacy of zinc and magnesium. Now, here's HBL Mauve, or the other term which I think maybe has become very common here in Australia is pyroles, or paroles. That's the class name for those 5-member cyclic compounds with the nitrogen included. These, you can call them pyroles, you can call them paroles, you can call it HPL, but please don't call it cryptopyrrole, because it ain't. This HPL associates also inversely with the activity of vitamin B6, as demonstrated on this chart, on this graph. The higher the urinary Mauve level, the lower the B6 activity in blood, as reflected by this enzyme function called EGOT. It's a pretty strong correlation. HPL Mauve pyrrole has quite a bit of basic science under its belt. Pyroles as a class are known to be largely neurotoxic. Some of these pyroles administered to humans can cause hallucinations acutely. In the case of HPL Mauve, the factor we're discussing today, one of the most important mechanisms of toxicity would appear to be its interference with heme. Now, heme is the molecule produced by the cells, which you would probably associate most commonly as a component of hemoglobin, the oxygen-carrying factor in blood. And in fact, the heme serves this function along with globin. But there's the other class of heme found within the body is a very non-erythroid, not associated with red cells or with hemoglobin, heme, which I'll show you in a moment is an important constituent of many important antioxidant enzymes. And it's this interference with heme levels which will shift experimentally acutely and significantly after a single dose to animals in the laboratory, is clearly one of the important mechanisms of toxicity. Bruce Ames, who I seduced into autism some 10 years ago, and I published an article which demonstrated that heme depression lowers intracellular zinc. So Mauve factor significantly depresses non-erythroid heme. That's experimentally demonstrated. This depression of heme is then associated with the loss of zinc, and whether this is displacement or because of higher levels of oxidative stress is unclear. But that also is well observed, that if you're low on heme, you lose zinc. And that induces more of nitric oxide via NOS, which increases oxidative stress. And there are several other potential mechanisms for higher oxidative stress in association with Mauve. These enzymes, the cystathionine synthase, which is on the way to the production of glutathione, the catalase, which removes hydrogen peroxide, which is produced by cell metabolism. It actually is a very, very important function in the body to remove hydrogen peroxide from the cell. Catalase requires heme as one of its constituents. Hemopexin for the translation of metallothionein. The terminology here is getting a little thick, but that's also very, very important in the way the body handles oxidative stress, and more specifically, how it handles exposure to toxic metals such as mercury and cadmium. Pyrrolase, guanylate cyclase, the cytochromes for energy production. If energy production is poor, oxidative stress has to be higher in cells. Sulfite reductase, and the production of nitric oxide itself, they all require heme. We got some original data for this article which showed that there's also a strong correlation between the level of Mauve, HPL pyrrole in urine, and levels of catalase. The higher the bad stuff, the lower the good. And likewise, Mauve and plasma glutathione. Very bad news in terms of resistance to oxidative stress. Plasma and nitric oxide in HPL has a direct positive correlation. The higher the urinary Mauve, the higher the nitric oxide, which itself in excess can be very, very damaging to cells by increasing oxidative stress. It's a free radical. Now, Mauve is associated with emotional stress as well as oxidative stress. Cold water immersion, even placing a person's hand and forearm in ice water, as my good friend Tapan Audia did in 1992 at New York University, is a stressful, emotional thing. It hurts, and Tapan showed that increased Mauve excretion within an hour. And that's the thing, is that these Mauve levels can really fluctuate rapidly in association with emotional or pain stress. This correlation has been very, very well documented over the decades. As found in the article, the relationship between oxidative stress and emotional stress, which are really interchangeable and have to do with the same chemical changes in the body, gut permeability, zinc levels, regulatory heme levels, and HPL are demonstrated here. The treatment, once you figure out that they've got elevated Mauve, and you're going to find this when there are symptoms, you're going to tend to get your higher levels when there's symptoms, whatever they are, ranging from schizophrenia to depression to hyperactivity, that you're going to have a better chance of demonstrating elevation in the urine when the symptoms are strongest. But the treatment here in pyramidal shape is at the very top we've got zinc. And zinc sometimes required in very, very high levels. 12 to 15 milligrams per day is the recommended daily allowance for zinc in adults, human adults. My son, weighing in at a strapping 15 kilograms when we first made this diagnosis, was requiring at one point 150 milligrams of zinc a day. That's an awful lot. And those kind of doses of zinc should definitely be managed by a nutritionally knowledgeable clinician. Because too much zinc can create a toxicity in the body with immunodepression. B6 and magnesium, I've treated this already, and you really see on a trial basis which they respond to better. And if they're going to be responding to the zinc and the B6, you're going to see it sometimes within 48 hours. Boy, you can see big improvements quickly. And usually within a week, things are going to start improving as you replete the zinc and the B6. And the articles that I've referred to will take you through the mechanisms, and they're not entirely well understood. But the bottom line here is that when you give zinc and B6, it depresses levels of Mauve, HPL, pearl in the urine. You can see it go away as you measure it. And it's been found that sometimes when the patients with this condition are under emotional stress or even physical stress of an acute nature, it's a good idea to give so-called stress levels or stress doses with higher levels of zinc supplementation, maybe 50% more for a few days. Generally, we like to follow zinc levels in the laboratory. And also copper levels occasionally. Although clinically, once you've enjoyed response for some time, you can go years without the necessity of repeating laboratory. Magnesium is needed when you give zinc. Or magnesium and zinc are both necessary for the proper metabolism of vitamin B6. I've got one of the co-authors in this on this paper was Fran Jernak, who's a full professor of biochemistry at the University of California. She wouldn't mind my mentioning that her son had very high Mauve. And we went to court to get the state of California to allow administration of the zinc and B6 that he really had to have while he was hospitalized. Fran did some interesting laptop work in her laboratory at Irvine, and she found that the whole range of prescription antidepressant medications, starting with and especially including the so-called SSRIs, depress the function of the enzyme pyridoxal kinase, which activates B6 in the body. And off this, we've decided that it's a good idea to, if you're going to be giving an antidepressant medication to a person with Mauve, in whom a deficit in B6 metabolism is inherent, that you have to be really, really careful, or with low doses and very, very careful observation of the effects of this antidepressant medication, because we think that these could be the subset of young patients who commit suicide after they show initial improvement on SSRIs and then become suicidally depressed. We think it may have to do with the way these SSRIs and other antidepressants interfere with B6 metabolism. So we'd caution to be very, very judicious about the use of these prescription medicines in the Mauve subpopulation. One of the other things here in a hurry is that there has been some misinterpretation of Bill Walsh's data that Doug Bibas generated some years ago on fatty acid blood levels in association with Mauve. I have these original data, and I've read them very, very, very carefully. And what it demonstrated is that the Mauve associates with lower levels of derivative omega-3 and derivative omega-6 fatty acids. Not surprising that both are depressed, as both are highly unsaturated. Both of these fatty acid components of cell membranes are highly unsaturated and therefore very vulnerable to oxidative destruction. But there's been some misunderstanding about which oils do these Mauve patients require. And it's, I believe, a significant misimpression that they really only need extra omega-6, as in the form of evening primrose oil or black currant seed oil or borage oil. They actually need plenty of fish oil too. And you can establish this with laboratory testing or just on a clinical basis in terms of which they need more of. But they tend to be low on both. I'd always provide a Mauve patient with generous antioxidants, including before administration of the oils, which actually can be toxic if you give them to a patient who has too much oxidative stress going. You titrate the nutrients to suppress Mauve, and you really do see them get better. Sometimes in 24 hours. You adjust for changing needs. My son is down to a mere 50 milligrams of zinc a day now and doing just great. And by golly, we really credit the testing and the subsequent treatment with nutrients with his full recovery. Thank you very much.